Dearest listeners, before we uncover a love that bloomed in secret, nurtured by ink and paper, allow this author a small indulgence. If these chronicles of the heart bring you some measure of delight, I should be most grateful if you would grant me a token of your favor with a like. Do subscribe so that you never miss a dispatch from my desk, and pray, leave a comment below. I am endlessly curious to know from which city or county you receive my whispers. Now, with such matters attended to, let us begin. What is more intoxicating than a love that blooms in secret, nurtured by words rather than glances, flourishing in shadow before it dares step into the light? Today, this author brings you the most enchanting tale of two souls who found their hearts through ink and paper, though they sat mere inches apart at every soiree of the season. But let us not rush, for the best scandals, like the finest wine, must be savored properly. Our tale begins, as all the finest stories do, with a young lady of exceptional talent and lamentable shyness. Miss Penelope Ashworth, 24 years of age, possessed the sort of beauty that whispered rather than shouted. Soft brown curls that caught the candlelight just so, eyes the color of autumn leaves, and a countenance that betrayed every emotion despite her best efforts to appear composed. One must confess, this author found Miss Ashworth to be one of the season's most intriguing mysteries. While other young ladies chattered and preened like exotic birds at Almack's, our dear Penelope could invariably be found in the quietest corner of any ballroom, her gloved fingers occasionally moving as if composing verses in the air. The ton, in their infinite wisdom, had quite written her off as a hopeless bluestocking. How little they knew! For Miss Ashworth harbored a secret that would have set tongues wagging from Mayfair to Marylebone. Hidden beneath her modest mourning dresses and behind her downcast eyes lived the soul of a poet whose verses could make even the most hardened rake weep. This author has it on good authority that her private journals contained such exquisite expressions of longing and beauty that Byron himself would have been envious. Would you believe, gentle listeners, that our dear Penelope had been writing since childhood? Her governess, a romantic soul herself, had encouraged this passion in secret. Poetry flowed from her pen like water from a spring, capturing beauty in the mundane, finding profound truth in simple moments. She wrote of love, though she had never experienced it, with such authenticity that one might have thought her a woman of vast romantic experience rather than an untouched maiden. This author recalls with particular clarity the winter-born ball of the previous season, where I observed Miss Ashworth seated behind a potted palm, scribbling furiously in a small notebook while the other young ladies danced. When her mother discovered her, the poor girl claimed to be making notes about the gowns for later discussion. Mrs. Ashworth, bless her conventional soul, believed this fiction and praised her daughter for finally taking an interest in fashion. But our tale truly begins on a particularly golden afternoon in late April, when Miss Ashworth made her customary escape from her mama's oppressive morning calls. Mrs. Ashworth, bless her ambitious heart, had determined that this would be the season her daughter finally secured a match. The poor woman had quite exhausted herself, dragging Penelope from one tedious gathering to another, never understanding that her daughter's reticence stemmed not from pride, but from a paralyzing fear of revealing her true self. That morning had been particularly trying. Mrs. Ashworth had invited no fewer than 3 prospective suitors to tea. Lord Farthingdale had droned on about his stables, and Sir Reginald Pumphrey had actually fallen asleep in his teacup. But it was Mr. Cheswick who had been the most trying. "I have heard you have literary inclinations," Mr. Cheswick had opined, addressing Penelope directly with a condescending smile. "A lady must be careful not to fill her head with more than she can carry. Poetry is a foolish distraction from the true womanly arts, such as conversation and embroidery." Penelope had merely lowered her eyes, a flush of humiliation warming her cheeks, while her mother offered a nervous laugh. After the gentleman departed, Mrs. Ashworth sighed. a sound of pure exhaustion as she glanced at a miniature portrait of her late husband on the mantelpiece. Mrs. Ashworth's ambition was plain for all to see, but this author often wondered if it stemmed not from greed, but from a deeper, colder fear. She knew in her bones the precarious fate of a woman of good family but modest means, left to the mercies of an indifferent world. On this fateful day, humiliated and desperate for air, Penelope sought refuge in Hyde Park, but not during the fashionable hour when all of society paraded their finery. No, she preferred the quiet of early afternoon when only nursemaids with their charges and the occasional elderly gentleman disturbed the paths. She carried with her a slim volume of poetry and her private notebook, seeking her favorite bench near the Serpentine. But gentle listeners, fate had other plans. For as she approached her sanctuary, she discovered it already occupied by a gentleman in a rather unusual state of absorption. This author must now introduce you to Mr. Edmund Blackwood, 27 years of age, possessed of an income of £4,000 per annum, and blessed with the sort of dark good looks that caused young ladies to develop sudden needs for their fans. He was everything a gentleman should be, accomplished, well-read, charming in company, and yet he harbored what society would consider a most eccentric passion. Mr. Blackwood, you see, was utterly devoted to the study of botanical sciences. While other young men of his station spent their afternoons at their clubs or pursuing various forms of dissipation, Edmund could be found examining flora with the intensity of a scholar. This author finds it rather delicious that such a handsome specimen of masculinity should be so enamored with delicate blooms and hardy shrubs alike. His passion had begun in childhood, when illness had confined him to bed for several months. His nurse had brought him pressed flowers to pass the time, igniting a lifelong fascination. By the time he reached Oxford, Edmund was corresponding with the finest botanical minds in Europe and had published several well-regarded papers on rare orchids. Society, naturally, found this passion rather odd. Ladies whispered behind their fans about the waste of such a fine fortune and face. His own mother despaired of ever seeing him properly married, lamenting that he spent more time in his greenhouse than in ballrooms. On this particular afternoon, Mr. Blackwood sat upon Miss Ashworth's favored bench, entirely absorbed in sketching a particularly fine example of Lavandula angustifolia, common lavender to those of us less scientifically inclined. His concentration was so complete that he failed to notice the young lady's approach until her shadow fell across his notebook. Would you believe, dearest listeners, that our normally eloquent botanist found himself quite without words? And Miss Ashworth, already flustered by the unexpected occupation of her retreat, could manage nothing more than a stammered apology before fleeing the scene like a startled fawn. But here is where our tale takes its first delightful turn. In her haste, Penelope dropped her poetry notebook, and Edmund, ever the gentleman, retrieved it. One can only imagine his conflict, to read or not to read. This author assures you that saints themselves would have been tempted, and Mr. Blackwood was no saint. What he discovered within those pages struck him like one of Cupid's most potent arrows. Here were verses of such sensitivity, such deep understanding of nature's beauty, that they seemed to speak directly to his botanical soul. One poem in particular, about the secret language of flowers, held him transfixed. In purple blooms and silver leaves, a message softly lies of constancy through changing seasons beneath uncertain skies. Edmund read these lines repeatedly, marveling at how perfectly the poetess had captured not just the botanical properties of lavender, but its very essence. Here was someone who understood that plants were not merely specimens to be catalogued, but living beings with their own stories to tell. Now, a lesser man might have simply returned the notebook through proper channels. But Edmund Blackwood, beneath his gentlemanly exterior, possessed a romantic heart that his scientific pursuits had never quite managed to suppress. Instead of seeking out Miss Ashworth's direction, he made a decision that would alter both their fates irrevocably. Near the entrance to Hyde Park stood an ancient oak, its trunk partially hollow from age. Local children often left treasures within its depths, and lovers from time immemorial had used it as a secret postbox. Mr. Blackwood, inspired by the poetry he had read, and quite unable to forget the glimpse he had had of its lovely author, placed the notebook within the hollow, along with a letter of his own. This author has managed to procure a copy of that first missive, and one must share its opening lines. To the poetess of exceptional feeling, your words about the secret language of flowers have touched a kindred spirit. I return your notebook with my deepest admiration and a small token of my esteem. The token? A perfectly pressed sprig of lavender preserved between sheets of paper with scientific precision. When Penelope returned the next day, driven by desperation to find her lost notebook, she discovered this unexpected treasure. Gentle listeners, if only you could have witnessed her expression. This author happened to be taking the air nearby, purely by coincidence, one assures you, and observed the play of emotions across her features. Shock, wonder, fear, and finally, a bloom of joy that rivaled any rose. What followed was a correspondence that would make the most celebrated love letters of history appear mundane. Through spring into summer, our shy poetess and passionate botanist exchanged letters through their hollow tree, never signing their names, never revealing their identities, but bearing their souls with increasing intimacy. He would send her pressed flowers with detailed explanations of their meanings and properties, weaving science with sentiment in a way that made botany seem the most romantic of pursuits. Each specimen came with stories, folklore from different cultures, medicinal uses from ancient texts, personal observations from his own garden wanderings. She would respond with verses inspired by his gifts, each poem more revealing than the last. Forget-me-nots accompanied discussions of memory and constancy. Wild roses spoke of untamed feelings barely held in check. And always, always, sprigs of lavender, their special flower, the symbol of their strange and wonderful connection. As weeks passed, their letters grew more personal. Edmund wrote of his childhood, his loneliness in society where he felt obligated to play a role that fit him poorly. Penelope revealed her own isolation, the terror of ballrooms where she felt like a sparrow among peacocks, the agony of sitting silent while her mother paraded suitor after suitor before her. The sharp-tongued pronouncements of men like Mr. Cheswick made her correspondence a sanctuary, a secret garden where her mind was celebrated, not condemned. Sometimes, she wrote in June, I fear I am going mad, living this double life. Only your letters remind me that my true self exists, that she is worthy of being known. Edmund's response included Jasmine and these words, You are not mad, dearest friend. You are simply too large for the small life society would have you lead. Like Jasmine, which blooms most fragrantly at night when no one is watching, your true beauty reveals itself in secret. But secrets shared between two souls are not burdens. They are treasures. But here, dearest listeners, is where our tale takes its most delicious turn. For while our lovers believed themselves complete strangers, fate had been laughing at them all along. You see, the cruelest irony of all was that Miss Penelope Ashworth and Mr. Edmund Blackwood moved in precisely the same social circles. They attended the same balls, the same musicales, the same tedious dinner parties that made up the London season. But our dear Penelope's shyness and Edmund's distraction, for how could he focus on insipid conversation when thoughts of his mysterious correspondent consumed him, prevented them from truly noticing one another. This author nearly revealed all during the Pemberton Ball in early June. Picture, if you will, our heroine standing near the refreshment table, having just received a letter containing pressed jasmine that had left her quite breathless. Not 10 feet away stood Mr. Blackwood, discussing the very same properties of jasmine with Lord Worthington. I held my breath when Lady Pemberton, our hostess, seemed about to introduce them. But at that moment, Penelope was cornered by none other than Mr. Cheswick, who, encouraged by Mrs. Ashworth, had become a most persistent shadow. "Hiding amongst the books again, Miss Ashworth?" he asked, blocking her path to the adjoining library. "A woman's hands are for holding a teacup, not a pen. Come, I shall do you the favor of a dance." Before she could protest, he was leading her to the floor, his grip firm on her arm. Penelope's courage failed her, and she suffered the dance in miserable silence. A fact confirmed to me later by Lady Pemberton's own lady's maid, a source of impeccable reliability, who noted Miss Ashworth's hasty retreat to the retiring room the moment the dance was over. The near misses multiplied. At Hatchard's bookshop, as reported to this author by a certain observant footman waiting outside, they reached for the same volume of botanical illustrations. Their hands nearly touched before Penelope snatched hers back, mumbling an apology and fleeing to the poetry section. Edmund, distracted, barely noticed the young lady in lavender who had nearly collided with him. At the British Museum, they admired the same preserved specimens, separated only by a quarter hour. During intermission at the opera, their eyes met briefly across the crowd, but both looked away, neither recognizing in the other the soul they knew so intimately through words. Oh, dearest listeners, how this author longed to shake them both. But the sweetest fruits, as any gardener knows, must ripen in their own time. Their letters, meanwhile, grew ever more intimate. Edmund began to speak of meeting. "I find myself walking through Hyde Park at all hours, hoping to glimpse you at our oak," he wrote. "How much longer must we remain shadows to each other?" But our poetic Juliet, terrified that her mundane self, the same girl who stammered before Mr. Cheswick, could never match the wit of her written words, demurred. "Let us remain as we are," she wrote, "perfect in our imperfection. In letters I am brave. In person I am a stammering girl. Would you have me destroy your beautiful illusion with my ordinary reality?" But Edmund Blackwood was not a man easily deterred. His scientific mind had been cataloging clues, and his romantic heart demanded more than paper and ink. It was a pressed violet that began the unraveling. You see, gentle listeners, Penelope had made a critical error. In her letter accompanying a poem about violets and faithfulness, she had mentioned, quite without thinking, that violets reminded her of her first season, when she had worn violet ribbons in her hair to her debut at Almack's. "They were my rebellion," she wrote, "tiny purple protests against the white dress my mother insisted upon." This seemingly innocuous detail proved to be the thread that, once pulled, would unravel the entire mystery. Edmund had an excellent memory and remembered with sudden clarity a young debutante from 3 years prior who had indeed worn violet ribbons at Almack's. This author watched Mr. Blackwood's face most carefully at the Mortimer Musicale the following evening, and one can report that when Miss Ashworth entered wearing a lavender gown, so close to violet, so clearly a sister shade, his expression underwent the most remarkable transformation. Recognition dawned like sunrise over the Thames, followed swiftly by wonder, then determination. During the interval, he approached her deliberately. Mrs. Ashworth intercepted him with maternal efficiency. "Mr. Blackwood, how delightful to see you. You must meet my daughter Penelope." "I should be honored," Edmund said, his eyes never leaving Penelope's face. "I believe we may have met before, Miss Ashworth. Was it at Almack's, perhaps, some years ago?" Penelope looked up sharply, meeting his eyes for the first time. Something in his expression, a knowing gleam, a secret smile, made her breath catch. I cannot recall, sir," she stammered, though a bloom of color in her cheeks suggested otherwise. "No matter," Edmund said easily, "though I do remember a young lady in violet ribbons who spent the evening looking as though she would rather be anywhere else. I sympathized entirely, being of a similar disposition myself." But our dear Edmund was far too clever to reveal his discovery immediately. No, he had a much more romantic plan in mind. Over the following weeks, his letters began to include more personal details, gentle hints that might lead his correspondent to recognize him. He mentioned his tendency to sketch during dull social events. He wrote of his sister's upcoming wedding, his mother's fondness for lemon tarts. This author has it on good authority that Miss Ashworth began to suspect, particularly after an incident at the Dashwood garden party where Mr. Blackwood was observed sketching the herbaceous borders. The way he held his pencil, the intensity of his focus, it was all terribly familiar. But our poetess, brave in words but cowardly in deed, could not bring herself to confirm her suspicions. What if she were wrong? What if she were right? Both possibilities terrified her equally. The situation reached its crisis in late July. Edmund's letters had become quite desperate, begging for a meeting. Penelope's responses grew shorter, until finally she sent what she intended to be her last letter. "My dearest friend, for that is what you have become, I must end our exchange. I fear I have given you my heart entirely through these letters, and I cannot bear to risk losing your regard when you discover how ordinary I am. Remember me kindly. Forever your devoted, P." She placed the letter in the hollow tree on the last day of July, along with a sprig of rosemary for remembrance, and resolved never to return. But Mr. Edmund Blackwood, as this author has mentioned, was not a man easily deterred. He retrieved her farewell letter within hours, and his response was swift and decisive. The annual Ashworth garden party was scheduled for the first week of August. As a gentleman of good standing, Mr. Blackwood procured an invitation with little difficulty. What Mrs. Ashworth did not know was that Edmund had made special arrangements with the gardener. The lavender garden, usually a simple affair, had been enhanced with new varieties from his own collection. The result was spectacular, a purple paradise that would serve as the perfect setting. This author attended, naturally, and can report that the gardens had never looked finer. Miss Ashworth, unaware of the trap being laid, moved through the party like a ghost. She wore white muslin with, you will appreciate this detail, lavender ribbons in her hair. The moment of truth began to unfold during the garden tour. As various gentlemen were being assigned to escort the young ladies, Mr. Chiswick stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Penelope. "Mrs. Ashworth," he declared, his voice carrying across the lawn, "with your permission, I should like to make my intentions towards your daughter known. I believe an alliance between our families would be most suitable." A hush fell. All eyes turned to Mrs. Ashworth. This was the match she had pursued, the status she had craved. But then she looked across the lawn. She saw Mr. Chiswick, preening and possessive, and she saw her daughter, standing near Mr. Blackwood. And for the first time that this author has ever witnessed, Penelope was not shrinking. She was looking at the botanist with an expression of quiet, hopeful recognition. In that instant, Mrs. Ashworth made a choice. She chose her daughter. "A most generous offer, Mr. Chiswick," she said, her voice clear and cool as ice. "However, I believe my daughter's heart has already chosen a different path, and this time I shall not stand in her way." She then turned to the housekeeper. "I believe Mr. Blackwood is to escort Miss Ashworth through the lavender garden." The scandalized whispers were simply delicious. With Mr. Chiswick left sputtering, the path was cleared. By pure chance and a mother's last-minute intervention, Penelope found herself walking with our botanical hero toward the fragrant purple rose. This author positioned herself behind a convenient hedge, purely to admire the roses, you understand, and thus witnessed the entire encounter. Picture, if you will, our shy poetess and determined botanist walking side by side through rows of purple blooms, the afternoon sun casting long shadows. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Mr. Blackwood stopped beside a particularly fine specimen of Lavandula angustifolia and withdrew something from his coat pocket. "Miss Ashworth," said he, his voice steady, "I wonder if you might do me the honor of accepting a small gift." He extended his hand, and there lay a sprig of lavender, perfectly pressed and preserved, with a small card attached. The very same lavender from his first letter. Penelope's gasp could likely be heard in the next county. Her hands trembled as she accepted it, and when she read the card, which bore a single line from her own poem about the secret language of flowers, her eyes filled with tears. "You," she whispered. "You knew. How long have you known?" "Since the violet ribbons," he confessed. "But in truth, my heart knew before my mind." Her joy, however, was immediately clouded by a lifetime of insecurity. "You knew," she repeated, a flicker of hurt in her voice. "You watched me at all those balls, knowing every secret of my soul, while I stumbled and stammered before you. Was I just an experiment to you? A botanical specimen to be observed before collection?" The accusation, born of her deepest fears, hung between them. Edmund did not flinch. He took her hand, his gaze unwavering. "Never a specimen, Penelope," he said, his voice resonating with a passion that dwarfed the gossip of the ton. "You were a symphony I could only hear snippets of in a crowded room. Your letters allowed me to hear the full composition. Your shyness was never a flaw. It was the very thing that proved your soul was too precious for public display. I did not want to claim you in a noisy ballroom. The woman who wrote of the secret language of flowers deserved to be met in her own language, here. I was not studying you. I was waiting, patiently, for the moment we could finally bloom together." Well, well. It seems our Mr. Blackwood was more eloquent than even this author had given him credit for. This was the validation she had craved her entire life. The tears that now fell were of pure, unadulterated joy. "My dearest poetess," he continued, "you have already given me your true self. Besides," and here his scientific nature asserted itself most charmingly, "I have theories about cultivation that would bore you to tears. We shall balance each other perfectly. You shall teach me the poetry of nature, and I shall teach you its science." What followed was a conversation that lasted through the party. Mrs. Ashworth wisely kept all other guests at bay. By sunset, they had created a botanical history of their courtship on a garden bench. The proposal, when it came, was an amethyst ring surrounded by seed pearls, chosen because it reminded him of lavender. And Penelope? Our shy poetess found her voice at last, accepting him with words that this author shall not repeat, for some moments are too precious even for gossip. The wedding of Miss Penelope Ashworth to Mr. Edmund Blackwood took place in September. The bride carried lavender and white roses, and the church was decorated with every flower from their correspondence. The groom's gift was a leather-bound volume of all their letters and pressed flowers. The bride's gift was a collection of new poems, written in the full joy of requited love. This author can report that Mrs. Ashworth was seen at the ceremony, not with the triumphant look of a social climber, but with the quiet, contented smile of a mother who had seen her child find true happiness. As for Mr. Cheswick, he was last seen grumbling into his port in a forgotten corner of his club, his social capital having withered on the vine. The Blackwoods retired to the country, to a garden planted with every flower they had exchanged. At its heart stood a bench beneath a young oak tree, a hollow already forming in its trunk. The following spring, this author paid a visit and found them collaborating on a book of botanical poetry for children. As I took my leave, Penelope presented me with a gift, a sprig of lavender. "For your next story," she said with a smile that transformed her. Indeed. And so, gentle listeners, another tale reaches its blessed conclusion, proving that love, like the finest gardens, grows best in secret before it blooms for all to see. And what of you, my devoted listeners? Did this tale of a shy poetess and a passionate botanist capture your imagination? Your likes are a most welcome encouragement, and I should be delighted to peruse your thoughts on the matter in the comments below. To ensure you are privy to my next scandalous discovery, Do subscribe to these chronicles, and perhaps even press that curious little bell. A most modern invention, I am told, but one that ensures a timely delivery of gossip. Until then, remember, the greatest scandals often lead to the greatest happiness. Your devoted chronicler, Lady Ravenswood. This author has recently learned that the hollow oak in Hyde Park has become something of a pilgrimage site for young lovers. A fact I learned from the head gardener himself in exchange for a small compliment on his prize-winning roses. One cannot help but feel that our dear Penelope and Edmund would be rather pleased. After all, every garden needs seeds to ensure the next season's blooms.